I have a child. I want to dedicate this to her, and I know her mom would not care, but her name is Shania. It was one of my first cases. Recently, her mom called, and she had passed away. And I really appreciated her mom calling me. This was a girl who took the bus downtown. She met a guy, and he was like, let me buy you new clothes, get your hair done, get your nails done, and let me shower you. And then a day later, she's in a hotel room and he's selling her and drugging her and doing all these things. When I intervened in this child's life at like 16 or 17, I knew who she was. She was a child of God who had this unbreakable spirit, who for a small time period authentically had individuals who loved her and that showed her who Jesus was. 3 days before she passed away, her mom had told me that she was ready to go home and be with Jesus, that she could not handle and recover from the level of trauma and all the things. And 3 days later, she took her life.
Hello and welcome to the Tinfoil Hat Club. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Ben.
And thank you for joining us yet again. So there you go. All right. We have another guest today. I'm very excited to have her on. We've planned this out now for a few weeks. And her name is Tracy McDaniel. Now, Tracy is a licensed clinical social worker.
Good job.
Right? All right. Thank you. And she actually has worked in her past with the FBI and in the world of trafficking. Unfortunately, kids specifically, but she has an interesting story and an interesting past. And we're going to kick it over to her in a second to get into what led her to this field, because it's obviously kind of feel like you probably need to have a calling to go there. Not a cheery place to work. You're going to see some horrific things. I think as we have gone over the last few years, I think trafficking, good and bad, has bad from the standpoint of we've recognized how bad it actually is, but good that we've actually started to recognize how bad it is so that we can bring it to the public conscious and start dealing with it. So definitely excited to have her on today, and it's probably not going to be the most cheery of episodes that we're going to do, but I think a very necessary one, and one that really highlights something that I think is a great evil at work in our world. Yeah. Because when we talk about all the time on the show, spiritual warfare, principalities, powers of darkness, and all these types of things, I think nothing makes the enemy happier than attacking children. Because if you can attack and break a child, then you're going to wind up having broken an adult. And I think we see that all too often from the recovery standpoint. So, Tracy, thanks so much for joining us, and just really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'll try to not make it so doom and gloom. I try to do a good balance of putting some excitement when I talk about this subject, and also just the things that come out of it. There's a lot of gratitude and humility, and to be able to see God do that work and take someone that is probably at the darkest place and bring hope and restoration to them is also probably one of the best things that's ever happened to me, for sure.
Yeah. So I can imagine you're like you said, the extremes, right? The feeling of what you see and all these horrific things, but then also knowing that you've rescued somebody or helped to get them out of that situation so that they can begin the healing process, I would think would be very, very rewarding. So it's probably a really extreme contrast on both sides of the coin. So what is the background story of how you got involved in this area?
So it's interesting. So I was a mortgage broker and doing real estate, and really felt God calling me for something more. And I didn't really know what that looked like. And I ended up going back to school to become a social worker. And, fast forward one of my clinicals, I was started at the Julian Center, which is one of the largest domestic violence shelters downtown Indianapolis, and started my clinicals and doing an internship there. And the individual whom I was with really, they were running a task force at that point. So I really shadowed her and really didn't know, because at that time they really did a lot of work with foreign-born individuals who had been brought over in those trafficking situations. And that's really when I was working with adults. And then it ended up, she left, and I ended up taking the position as I'm in graduate school, right, finishing up or starting graduate school, ending my bachelor's. And a girl came in, and she really, God used her to change the trajectory of my life. I think at that time I was kind of in this, what I like to call utopic innocence of
Yeah.
how wisdom and age can kind of jade you as I am now. But I wasn't even supposed to be there that day or that night. And this young girl came in and she fled a trafficking situation from Chicago. And
Mm.
the interesting thing about this child was that she was pretty much raised in the Department of Child Services. She was taken from her mom. She'd been in like, 14 to 16 foster homes. She had lost a baby to the system at a very early age, maybe 15 or 16. I don't know exactly now. She was sitting across from me pregnant. She was engaged. Not only was she trafficked, but she was engaged in prostitution and trying to survive. And the way that she actually got away from her trafficker is she had been in prison also for check forgery. And she's very resilient. But I remember thinking to myself, like the way she escaped from her trafficker, she found a cop on the inner city streets of Chicago and turned herself in and went back to prison, finished her time. And
Wow.
then by the time she got to the Julian Center, she was in a domestic violence relationship, but like I said, she was probably about 8 months pregnant.
Mm.
And I just remember looking at her and not caring about any of those things, right? Because at the end of the day, she was a child of God. And I
Yeah.
remember vividly thinking, like, God loves her just as much as he loves me. And that really changed the trajectory of my life. That one young girl who was, I want to say she was 18 or 19 at the time. Um, and the best part of the story is that years later, when I started Restored, I was able to go back to her and tell her how God used her to change the trajectory of not only my life, but when I met her and started investing and researching and started when I worked within the task force at that time, I really started seeing that, oh my God, children are being sold for sex in our city and nobody gives a shit. Nobody's doing anything about it.
Yeah.
And God convicted my heart. And if you can imagine, at this point, I am working full time, I am in graduate school, I am having to do clinical full time. And one day, some friends of mine who went to church with me said, and they came to my office in the Julian Center and they were like, if you could see your future, what would it be? And it wasn't even like I had thought about it. I was like, I want a place where I can help restore these girls and bring awareness. And that is really where Restored came from. So as I'm in clinicals and I'm working full time which was a big job, and I'm trying to finish graduate school, I also decided it would be a good idea to start a nonprofit. And that is where Restored came. And Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with them, but they are a law firm that does a lot of pro bono work for individuals who don't have a lot of resources or can get really caught up in the system and don't really know their legal rights and housing. And they had given me a space in the basement, and God just continued to work. And I remember being in that basement, and I remember that first day being in that basement and not knowing. I mean, I didn't have a clue what I was doing, right? I mean, I knew the
Yeah.
mechanics of how and to bond with these girls and all the things, but I didn't know how to run a nonprofit or any of those things. And I remember just sitting there and saying, it doesn't matter if I fail, it doesn't matter if whatever you use me for. But I knew two things that day. I knew that God had called me this first season, it wasn't forever. And I knew that if I changed the trajectory of one girl's life, that's all God called me to do. And I was in a very blessed place where we were serving over 100 kids per year. And
Wow.
um and why what's it's incredibly heartbreaking, but it's also the human spirit is also incredible. And when you can bring
Yeah.
someone to God, I wasn't preaching to these girls, but I definitely, they knew that I loved Jesus and they knew that I was there because of him. And
Yeah.
my actions are is what showed them that it didn't matter what they were engaged in or what they had done in their past. that I was going to do everything I could to advocate for them and make sure that they got a chance at healing.
So a couple follow-up questions on some of the things you said. Do you feel like, or has there been any evidence of the social systems, the governmental-based social systems are funneling and feeding the trafficking?
Ben's like, what is she going to say? Yeah, I say this all the time. I mean, I think that people, when everything went down, right? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. I had to make this announcement that I was closing Restored. And I think a lot of people were under this perception that I was closing because maybe for me personally, I'm not talking for my staff or the way that I did things, but because of the girls and we did serve girls. I mean, and I'll talk about that, and I'll talk about boys are trafficked, and it's such an unknown. But
that
it's
was my question.
but also it was, and I shared this a little bit with Ben, is that it's the system that had worn me down so much that I was tired of being the loudest person in the room. I don't care how you break it, what your belief system is, what your political, whatever. If you believe that a child should be sold for sex, or that a child commits prostitution at 16 years old, you have a problem.
Yeah.
And in the beginning of my career, especially when I worked for the Julian Center, I had to walk. I don't want to say I had to walk a line. I think that they were very great about, I've always been my own person and has stood in my own truth. I'm definitely a very direct human. I come from a Marine family and, have dealt with my own things just growing up. And I think as I was starting to go and I was starting to testify and trying to get these laws changed, and the first law really is basic, is that a child could not be held, charged for prostitution at 16 years old. And there was well, they can consent at, 16. So, and I'm going to say this, and I know this is a little hard to hear, but and I would say this, if you walked into a hotel room, and I'm asking Kyle and Ben, I want you to answer this. If you walk into a hotel room and you see a man having sex with a child, what would your automatic response be?
I would stop it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
probably try to kill him.
Yeah.
But would your would you think, oh my God, this child can't consent. He's raping her. He's assaulting her. But if you walk in the same room and there's $20 on the nightstand, then now she's a prostitute.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And this is
ridiculous.
And this is in the beginning of my career, what I definitely had. You have a little bit more fire until as you go. Right. And I would come up with, it would be the same thing. It would be, or when I'm I believe wholeheartedly, if somebody gets caught purchasing sex from a child, they should have a felony.
Yeah.
That would deter. Absolutely. I mean, when we think about human trafficking, it's a supply and demand issue.
Yeah.
And most of the men who are purchasing sex are middle-aged men. These are men that are in our circles. These are men that are in our church. These are men that are at soccer club. These are men whom are at these restaurants. And when people are like, well, are you sure? Yeah, because I'm in the hotel. I've done
you're seeing
all
this.
aspects of the recovery, doing John stings where we're trying to get, let's see who's purchasing sex. I've been in these hotel rooms at 4:00 in the morning and 3:00 in the morning. And I've had to go and look at things that will be forever imprinted in my head, trying to find my own kids when they ran away and things like that. So 1,000%. There's a thing when I first started that's in Washington, D.C., and it's called Boys on the Hill. And it's where men are purchasing boys. So there's all these, and I could get on a whole soapbox. It could be a whole nother podcast, but there's so much that needs to be done, but I don't know if it ever will change until God comes home.
No, I shamefully have to agree with you there. It's sad because I think we're called to fight the good, and I think so many of our brothers and sisters in Christ, this is where we really fall off. I think our mission is to fight the good fight and get as many people to Christ as we can until he comes back.
Yeah.
And I see so many of our brothers and sisters in Christ that just seem to be contented to sit back in their chair and live their comfortable life and pretend that none of these things are happening, waiting for Christ to return. Mm-hmm. And it's happening right underneath our noses. And I think that this was really highlighted a few years ago when we did go through COVID, how willing everybody was to just not, or how much they fought against giving up their comfort, what they were willing to do to keep their comfort, I guess is what I'm getting at. So it's just kind of sad. Is the main demographic, and I think we kind of already touched upon an age range, but from a race perspective, is the main demographic Ben and I? Yes. Is it middle-aged white males?
Yes.
On both sides, male and female. As far as the kids being trafficked, male and female, is the white male our age is the main demographic that's doing
purchasing sex. Yes.
Yes. Wow.
See, I would. That's beyond me because I don't think about that.
Because you have daughters.
I wouldn't know how to do it. I mean, that just shows that you have to be like that deprived and that lost to be able to do something like that. Wait, okay. What happens to those guys? Like, what's the maximum that gets caught?
It depends. So when we would do operations, what we call anyone, sometimes if you're brazing the newspaper, and we would do these ops, they're called Operation Cross Country, or I would do a lot of ops with like local law enforcement. It depends. A lot of them, when we would do a John sting, it would be that we had what's called a UC, an undercover, and she would be a female law enforcement agent, and she would pretend that she was the one that was working, and we would have guys, and a lot of these guys, I mean, definitely the stereotype of, yes, sometimes we would have truck drivers. But mostly, like I remember this specifically. And I want to say this because I talk about this a lot. People don't understand with the justice system, right? That everybody loses, right? I remember we were doing an op and we were in Fort Wayne. This was just a couple days from Thanksgiving. And I mean, the tactic here was that when they were brought out in handcuffs, that the news was there. So it's almost kind of like a shame tactic, right?
Yeah.
So there was one guy in particular, and he was like a medical assistant, or he was a nurse, right? And if I had $1 for every time I heard, especially from a man or even a girl working, this is my first time. This is my first time. I believed actually in this situation, this was actually this guy's first time. So fast forward, at this point, I'm doing research, right? I'm in there, I'm taking their ID. I'm privately, I think at this point, I'm at the Red Roof Inn. It was disgusting. I'm in a small bathroom and I'm asking these questions for research purposes for myself and law enforcement. And just like, why are you purchasing sex? What brought you? How did you find, I don't even remember. It wasn't Backpage because it was shut down. I don't even know where we were. It was on the internet. We were finding it. I can't even remember at the moment. But so if you can imagine, this guy gets taken out in handcuffs and he's on TV, right? So prior to that, he was like, can somebody call my wife and ask her to pick up my children? Now if I'm going to be honest with you guys, because I'm like, give me the damn phone and let me call his wife and let me tell him
right. Yeah.
my self-righteous self in that moment, because I was so tired of it.
Yeah. Right.
And then later on, this broke my heart. So later on, the detective that was working, she's a good friend of mine. She had called me and she's like, hey, do you remember that guy? And I said, yeah. Well, somebody within the department knew her. So here's this wife.
You talking about his wife?
Yes. So here's this wife. It's a couple days before Thanksgiving. She has to go pick up her kids and then blasted on the news is her husband buying sex. And it just killed my heart for her and those children.
Yeah.
2 days before Thanksgiving, because that's the thing. It's not a victimless crime. You know, even when it comes to the families, it just destroys all the things. And I can only imagine, even as a therapist, like the shame and embarrassment and what that poor wife was thinking. And I remember her being on the phone because it was on speaker. And she kept saying, was he in an accident? Is he okay? Was he in an accident? Her first thought was, oh my God, is my husband okay?
Yeah, right.
Do I need to go to the hospital? But instead, he was walking out of the shadiest part of Fort Wayne from a Red Roof Inn being put in handcuffs. And it's heartbreaking. And I mean, I think for me at the end, especially at the intel, I'm still on the search for this. And I always say this, if I ever decide to go back to get my PhD, it will be my focus, because I am so consumed with why. Why is it a place where kids still have so much access to where these individuals can purchase them? And not even kids, the women too. Like in that situation, this person was an adult. When we're doing like Operation Cross Country, we're doing other operations, our ultimate goal was to recover kids. So to answer your question, Ben, I will say for the men who's purchasing sex, no, there is really not a big consequence. There just really isn't.
Wow.
There's not a big consequence for traffickers, which we can get into that. But so it just perpetuates, because there's nothing that's really stopping, except maybe someone has to go to John school and they have to hear me lecture them or a prosecutor lecture them for 30 minutes to an hour and do some community service. That's not really. And here's the kicker. A lot of the men that I interviewed, they have children, 3 to like 16 or whatever. And
That's
it's
crazy.
like, how would you, but I also think now that I've been able to step back and have some times, I think it also perpetuates this idea that we are living among so many individuals that are like predators.
Yeah.
You know?
There's this thing going around right now online. I've seen it for a while, of the bear. Would you rather be alone in the woods with a guy you didn't know or a bear? And it's just like, it's sad, because while I think it's kind of ludicrous in some ways, on the other hand, I also look at it from the standpoint of like, these women actually have gotten to the point where they would, a lot of them would feel more comfortable with a ravenous bear in the woods than they would you and I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
Because you don't know
insane.
what you're getting.
Yeah, it's just insane.
But it only it only takes 8 pounds to pull something off, though.
As far as 8 pounds,
8 pounds of tug.
yeah, there you go. Jeez, make them pay.
That's right. Make that.
Well,
man pay.
I always say now, because I love to hike. I love to be out and Ben has met Kona, which is my baby, but it's having a full bred German Shepherd who is at her mama's side has been a game changer for me. I don't have to, if I want to go walk at 5 a.m. and it's kind of getting light, like I can take her. And, you know, I have tons of friends who run, and it's like, it shouldn't be, if I run today, am I going to get assaulted or murdered? And I think violence just has, honestly, I mean, even if you work at crime shows, and I'm just as guilty because I love watching them, it becomes, we're inundated with it all the time.
Yeah, we are.
There's
definitely a push from that side to make us think that while the world is dark, and there's a lot of darkness in the world, it's not as dark as I think sometimes we have it pushed to us that it is, right? And we get these really crazy things in our head.
Yeah, Maria watches a lot of crime shows, and I can't take the first 48. That's not my thing.
A funny thing is, the whole time from almost the get-go before we hit record today, the thing that's been popping in my head is that those old Dateline episodes, To Catch a Predator.
Yeah. Oh, I watch them all the time. I mean, when you think of To Catch a Predator, that's what we were doing.
That's exactly right.
That's what we were doing.
It was the exact same kind of thing that you were talking about, because you're talking about like a sting operation, a setup, a sting operation, and you're putting an undercover in there. But it's just amazing to me, because it was like Dude, it's like a revolving door at a saloon.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole show, just one guy after another guy after another guy after another guy.
And they don't get anything. This is like a slap on the wrist.
Yes, if that.
Wow. Yeah, because that's not going to change. Because you obviously have someone that has deep psychological deviant behavior, right?
Yes. And it's not their first.
Yeah, no. And that's the funny thing, too. You said that. And that's one of the first things that rang to me in that show is it's always the guy's first time.
Yeah, I was
Always.
thinking about...
I've never done this before.
I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah, what's the chances? I swear I've never done this. Is my first time.
What was the guy was it in Florida where he walked in and somebody was like raping his kid and he beat him really bad and he called the police. He said, "You better get here before I kill this guy."
I can understand that.
Yeah.
And he was like sentenced, like they didn't charge the dad, but the guy was sentenced for a long time. But I mean, his face, his like mug shot was just like a big, swelled up like a ball.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing too, because what would have happened if he would have killed the guy?
That was Florida, probably nothing.
I don't know,
Nothing.
probably not. But
I can tell you, nothing would have happened.
Yeah, but there are other places in this country where they probably would have prosecuted him.
California,
For murder
they would have prosecuted him in California.
Absolutely, and that's insane to me because I mean, like, we go back to the biblical justice, man. I'm like, dude, it's game over. You're gonna get stoned.
Yeah,
you're gonna get stoned to death. And rightfully so, because why wouldn't you? And that's the thing too, is like we see this all the time, and the breakdown of the justice system and the weakness of the justice system and the corruption of the justice system is just ridiculous. Like to think that we would. I worked for a long time dealing with organized retail crime, so I worked in kind of that world, and while different, similar problem, but one of the things that comes to mind during that time is you're always trying to get to the bottom of the well, right? You may catch this person that's stealing on the surface, but the that's just the spider that's crawled on the outside of the web. You got to go travel the web to get back to the center to find out what's really going on. So I apply the same thing when I think of a 16-year-old girl that gets caught up selling sex and is acting as a prostitute. I would think that there's a whole ton of questions and a whole lot of things that you would want to ask this human being and do a good job of protecting them from who has put you out here. And then you talk to that individual and then you talk to the next individual and you get to the bottom of this web. Instead, it just sounds like we're just treating the surface and dealing with the 16-year-old and the pimp is running around free as a bird out there.
Well, Kyle, that is just the system as a whole.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go from trafficking to foster. I mean, the level of dysfunction, the level of, I mean, all of it. I mean, all the way from the church to a lot of people just stand by and we don't. I mean, I even see it now. Like sometimes on TikTok, it'll be like, you'll see someone hobbling down the stairs. And we live in a world that is just so entitled and self-righteous and not just willing to give their neighbor a helping hand. And not everybody is like that. But there's a lot of people who would just ignore anything going around. I mean, this is probably the first time now that I can go stay in a hotel and I'm not scanning for, is someone engaging in prostitution? Is someone being trafficked? Do I see a child? I mean, and I think for me, and I can talk about this like as we move towards the end, is that it becomes consuming, right?
Yeah, sure.
Especially, I have such a heart for kids and I don't care whose child it is. I don't care to correct somebody else's child.
Yeah.
And I don't care to love and engage with someone's child because they're children. And we are supposed to love them and mentor them and advocate for them and make sure that they're okay. And it is mind-blowing to me at times the way the system, we just perpetually put trauma after trauma after trauma. And it's kind of like I don't know if you or Ben said it in the beginning, but we have a bunch of child adults walking around who are broken, who have addiction issues, who have mental health issues, who have survived and seen things that nobody on this earth should have to see. And we wonder why we have so much dysfunction in the world. Because these generational trauma cycles are not being broken. And I think about that a lot, even like in biblical, like these generational cycles.
Yeah.
And stepping in and wanting something different. We all have a choice. It doesn't matter how old we are. And people choose sometimes the same or that learned behavior, or people choose something different. And these kids, and a lot of kids, whether they're trafficked or assaulted, or, I mean, even if they're like in the foster system or raised, like they're born and they don't have a fighting chance. It's like, okay, here you are. Like, we're not doing things when these children are coming in here and being drug addicted. Well, maybe if mom stays clean for this, or maybe this. And I'm going to get on a little political soapbox real quick. So your viewers may like this or not like this, but everybody wants to talk about pro-life, but we're not talking about the life around us. We're not doing anything about it. Everybody wants to talk about pro-life. Why the hell are guns still going in schools? I mean, there's so many layers to our system, but everyone, I don't care what your political belief is, I don't care what your religious background is, the common belief that we should all have is that we should be doing everything we possibly can to protect our children.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Everything. Like, that should always be top priority.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we don't live in that world. I wish we lived in that world. That's why I get exhausted and cranky and mean and say things, because I get very frustrated. I'm like, I don't know how you just can't feel that way.
Yeah. It's,
yeah.
There's something that happened where back in the day, we were very communal. Like, you go back to the 40s, the 50s, and definitely earlier than that, we were very community based. It wasn't this, it was like you were friends with your neighbors, and you knew people in your community, and you knew that Joe had an alcohol problem, and everybody knew that Joe had an alcohol problem. And if Joe went and smacked around his wife, then, there'd be people that would deal with that, and we probably wouldn't even involve the police a lot of times.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, we stopped being that way. And with that went I think, a lot of the psychological aspect of protection, where we just kind of stick our head in the sand and we just like, someone else will deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I think like law enforcement has to be completely like overloaded and overworked. And the justice system, I think, is overloaded and overworked, but there's also a huge breakdown there. And so there's, like you said, there's just so many facets of this that just seem like it's just this crumbling building in every column you look at that holds this thing up. And it's like, how long before it finally comes down? And one of the things, and this is another fastball, hot one down the middle of the plate here, but unfortunately, I think we see it, and a lot of people aren't saying it. It sure seems to me, as crazy as this is, as we continue to allow sexual deviancy, we are eventually going to, and I'll get your take on this, it feels like we are norming pedophilia.
1,000%. 1,000%. That is part of the problem. We have normalized this idea. I mean, think about, and I don't know how old you guys, like, I'm 47. I grew up with the MTV, Madonna, Like a Virgin. I was like mesmerized. I remember my stepdad being like, you guys aren't allowed to watch that. And like, that was like the end all be all. And now you can be naked and dancing on the stage. And we're like criticizing her body instead of saying, why are we allowing this to be shown? And it goes with all social media. Like, we, especially as a therapist now moving into private practice, I don't really do a lot of work in trafficking anymore. But I work with these teenagers who they are so consumed with everything going on around them, how they should look, why they should look this way. And we're not doing the things that we need to do to protect them. It just has evolved into anything goes. When the Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson, when her boob was showed.
Oh yeah, Super Bowl. Yeah,
that's something that would be celebrated now. And it's just like, at what point are we doing the things we need to do to protect our mind? I mean, I think that's the thing too. Like we all, I mean, I'm guilty of going down the rabbit hole with all late night and I'll scroll TikTok and I'm like, I have to be like, no, you need to go to bed.
Yeah.
But like as an adult, if I know the harm and I know that I can go to that rabbit hole, of course, children are like 3 and 4 and that's how they're getting their self-worth and the idea of like who they should be, what they should be. And everyone's really losing their authentic self. But not only that, is people are learning this idea of community and communication. And it's a predator's dream. It is a predator's dream.
I remember watching, this is Different Strokes when I was a kid. And there was
I loved that show. I loved that show, Ben.
There was a guy that
poor Dana Plato. She became a mess.
He took pictures of Arnold and somebody else. And I always remembered that from when I was a kid.
Forgot about that.
And I was just like, that's not right. And the more stuff that comes out about what goes on in Hollywood and things, that was probably actually going on then.
Well, that's funny because I made a mention of Dana Plato because she wound up becoming a mess, and I think, did she wind up dying from an OD? I think she OD'd, but she got into porn and all kinds of other stuff. But then you see the things like the Weinstein thing that came out, and you wonder like what was happening to this kid. She was, who knows how old she was when she started the show. She was probably like 14, 15, 16 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
But what was happening to her? Because you don't get into all that stuff. You don't get into the drug use and you don't get into the porn without a lot of crazy stuff happening to you psychologically. That's just not somebody wakes up someday and goes, I'm going to get into this.
Yeah.
It's a bath, it seems like. You ease into this, right? So what has happened to this individual from a psychological trauma perspective to have her go there?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, that's why I was like, why didn't they stop it?
Yeah.
Even though, are they like, is it like a PSA? They do this show, but behind the scenes, everything is terrible. I mean,
there's a show.
We're exploiting. I mean, you guys, here's the thing. I mean, we continuously exploit our children.
Yeah.
But don't realize we're exploiting them. You know, I always think of Drew Barrymore and I think, you know, wow, where she's at. But Drew Barrymore had said, and I want to say maybe 11 or 12, like she's in a bar doing cocaine.
Yeah.
And it becomes this culture of money, power, greed, money, power, sex. And it just keeps going. I mean, now as an adult, I don't see that thing. I mean, think about growing up, like even listening to certain music, right? I'm not thinking of those like lyrics. I'm just thinking like, this is popular. It's the beat. But as an adult, when I'm like listening to those, I'm like, what? Or even unconsciously, that stuff is being put into our brain and we're digesting it.
I know. There's some stuff that we listened to back when, because we're all the same age. And I remember listening, go back and listen to some of the 90s, the alternative songs and stuff, and listen to some of the lyrics. Because you don't really, when you're a kid, I listened to more of the music than I did so much the lyrics, I guess.
Yeah.
And now as a parent in my mid 40s, you listen to some of the lyrics and you're like, whoa, that is really dark.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of times it's kind of funny because it's kind of like juxtaposed against the music.
Yeah.
The music maybe won't be so dark, but the theme is extremely dark.
Yeah.
And you don't, like you said, you don't really realize it until you kind of get a little bit of seasoning on you, right? The seasoning right here and right over here. And you don't realize it. And our kids, it's just so much more now because of all the technology.
Oh my goodness.
Like, I don't know, like as a parent, it's like,
if I could burn Snapchat down, I told Ben I would.
Amen.
I'm not even on there.
I had to get, dude, I tell you what. So like, I wasn't a big Twitter person, but when we started the podcast, I had us on Twitter, and we still have a Twitter profile on there, but I quit putting stuff on there because it is literally just such a disgusting cesspool of just all kinds of stuff. Like, it's almost like it's just like it's depressing.
Yeah.
I can see how, like, if you want to break a human mind, just put them in front of Twitter all day and let them go.
Yeah.
My goodness, it'll break your soul. It's so depressing.
I mean, we live in, I mean, this is, I mean, I think just, we just consistently repeat history, right? We live in a society that just perpetuates propaganda and rhetoric. I mean, that's just where we're at now. Wow. I had a history teacher tell me once, this is when I was like in my 30s when I went back to school. And she was like the lady who was like disheveled. She had the hose that was like rolled up to the knees, but it went down, and just consistently always need to wear a bra. Like, she just, and I remember she said this to me, and it has stuck with me all these years. And she said, until humans realize what they're doing and take responsibility, history is consistently going to repeat itself. And I think I just thought of that. And I mean, it's such profound, especially over these last, we'll just say 5 years with, all the things that have happened where, like, it's with COVID and then Black Lives Matter and women's rights. And it's just like, where are we doing? What are we doing? And it's just that consistently going backwards, like everything with Israel. I mean, it's just, if the Kool-Aid's out there, people will drink it. There's no critical thinking anymore. There's just all this group thing. Yeah. And we got to do better.
No, it's crazy to me, because one of the things that's so insane to me through all of this stuff, and we have a conversation coming up in a few weeks with a guy, but we're going to talk about kind of the indoctrination side of the coin, because that's almost like that's a whole nother topic, right? Is the crazy thing is, one of the things that goes with this is the scrubbing of history. Mm-hmm. We want to scrub history, and we want to cleanse history.
Right.
And it's so funny, because it's like, okay, well, if you go and you cleanse history, then you're going to eventually forget it happened. Yeah. And then the old saying says, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. Yeah. And that's exactly what we're doing. Everything that we're doing is basically just setting us up for the fall later for the same exact stuff.
I mean, we live in a society where you just can't agree to disagree. And it's just like, everybody has a right to their opinion. You don't have to agree with it.
Yeah, right.
You don't have to participate in it. But you love your neighbor. Yeah, it's not a hard commandment when we really think about it.
Yeah.
It's really not.
Sometimes it's really hard, I guess.
and I'm like that. I'm at the age where I just don't even like people. I just want to be with my dog. But at the end of the day, we have to find and love the human spirit, because I mean, I joke about that, and some of it's true. I really don't sometimes like to be around people, but also, like, we are built for connection. Mm-hmm. We're not built for isolation. But when we don't have authentic connection, all this other stuff gets poured in.
So there's kind of, to me anyway, and I definitely want to get your take. There's kind of two sides to this. There's the sexual deviancy side of, we have these men mainly, and it's not all guys. I'm sure there's women too, and I'm sure that it's not just white guys. I'm sure that there are other gentlemen of other races that are doing this as well. Gentlemen.
Yeah, let me say, in my experience, because I had offended somebody before, in my experience, what I have personally experienced, white men are purchasing sex, and Black men and Hispanic men are the ones that are selling, are the traffickers. Mm-hmm.
Really?
In my whole career, I've had 3 white guys that were the traffickers.
Really?
Yeah, and I think people think it's not me. It's a broad statement, but it's my experience. When you do this for so long, and I've done ops, I've trained all over the United States. That's my experience. But kind of like you said, when young men come into this world, they're not trying to be a trafficker. Yeah. It's environment and behavior, and I can talk about a couple of cases in that. All these things play a role. And I think, and just to make this quick comment, the difference is, like, I love the show. I've watched the show every once in a while, Naked and Afraid, right?
Mm.
And you know why if people watch that show, like someone like me is watching it, the focus isn't they're naked. It's when we choose to sexualize everything, that's when it has become this really dark gray area. Because bodies are bodies, right? I mean, I have 2 nephews and they have been where it's like your body's your body. Everybody there's penises, there's, not to be graphic, but there is.
Yeah, no, it's true.
It's a body. It's what God made us. But once it goes to we're going to sexualize everything, that's the society in which we're living in.
Yeah.
Little girls who are doing gymnastics that have makeup on should not be sexualized.
Yeah.
Those 2 things should remain. Whether someone agrees with all the makeup and all the stuff is one thing, but they should still be free to do that and still be little girls where they're not sexualized. Yeah. And we live in a society that perpetuates sex. I mean, I say this all the time, and this is important, I think, for the audience, and I want everyone to hear me on this. Any human being can be trafficked, these kids. All it takes is it is not rocket science. I always say this all the time. Sometimes these traffickers are like the best children's psychologists, right? They know exactly, like if you have a daddy issue, they know how to be that daddy. If your mom doesn't love you enough, they know exactly how to step in. If you're not getting enough food or you're in survival or you don't love yourself, they know exactly what to say to you to manipulate you.
Yeah.
To get you to meet them. To get to
do what they want.
To get them to do what they want.
Yeah.
And it takes 30 seconds. People are like, oh, no way. Yeah. You get on Facebook. You have these people going into hey, I think you're pretty. If no one's ever told a child that they're pretty, or you have someone walking down the street in different areas, and they're like, hey, get in. It's as easy as I have a child, and I want to kind of dedicate this to her, and I know her mom would not care, but her name is Shania. She was one of my first cases, and hopefully I don't want to get emotional and cry about it, but recently her mom called, and she had passed away, and I really appreciated her mom calling me. I was definitely like taken back, and it took me a few days to call her mom back because I think as an advocate, you never want to get that call, right? That someone you've worked with, someone that you love, someone that you have put so much work into, and they've given so much that they had passed away. And a little bit of backstory on her is this was a girl. She went to Carmel High School, right? Mm. And just so everyone knows, if you live in this area, Hamilton County was one of my biggest areas. Just so we're all clear, this doesn't just happen in downtown Indianapolis or impoverished areas. This happens in rural areas. It happens everywhere.
Yeah.
So this is a girl who took the bus downtown. She met a guy, and he was like, let me take you to Circle Center Mall. Let me buy you new clothes. Let me get your hair done. Let me get your nails done. And let me shower you, right? Yeah. And then a day later, she's in a hotel room, and he's selling her and drugging her and doing all these things. Now, when I intervened in this child's life, I will say for me, she was always very respectful. I kind of shared with Ben. I've had those shares thrown at me. I've had girls tell me to go F myself. I mean, I've seen it all. And it didn't matter. It didn't hurt my feelings. Right. But with her, it was a rough situation. We'll just say in the with prosecution, she had charges, all these things. And I say that because it takes a village. At the time, the judge who worked with me on this had a really strong faith. I think when I came into this, people get really like, oh, she has a ministry. This is a Christian-based organization, a lot of these things. And God just removed all those barriers. But it was because of this judge in particular who, I mean, I had a fight. I can't even tell you how hard I had to fight. We'll just say with Department of Child Services to get this child moved out of the state of Indiana in the middle of nowhere to a farm, right? Where I'm like, if you run, girl, you're gonna be running for miles. And to where she would get the trauma treatment that she needed.
Yeah.
And this was a girl who like graduated high school. I was at her graduation when her mom called. I still had the stuff on my phone when I'm going through it and bawling, and I see all these moments. And it was hard, right? It was hard for her. She had this like iguana. She would always want me to hold it when I go visit her at this place. And I'm like, no, like, I'm not. And she learned how to garden. She learned how to do all these things. And she was doing really well. She graduated the program. She chose to stay in the state. She started college. 2 blocks down, she met a guy who made all these promises. And then it just goes back. It becomes like what people don't understand with trafficking with these girls. It becomes a hustle. It becomes an addiction. Shame covers them. And some get out and some don't. And even if some get out and they don't go back into trafficking, a lot of times they end up in domestic violence relationships or all these things. And what I want people to know, like, if you were to look at this child and she had been in trouble, I had not seen her in a while, and I pulled up my case and looked at her. We'll just say she had a lot of charges out there.
Yeah.
So I'm talking to her mom. I finally call her mom back, and I really appreciated like her mom calling me, even though it was really something, it was very hard for me to hear. Her mom said to me, I know that she would want you to know, but I want you to know when she was doing the things that she was doing, how many girls she was trying to help just like you.
Yeah.
And I know that she would want to know that. And 3 days before, and people could have their opinions, and I have my own, and my own heart for Christ. And 3 days before she passed away, her mom had told me that she was ready to go home and be with Jesus, that she could not handle and recover from the level of trauma and all the things. And 3 days later, she took her life. And whether she took it or she OD'd, I mean, definitely drugs was in the thing.
Sure.
And I remember I had such a peace, right? Because as hard as I worked, as hard as my advocates worked, as hard as therapists work, like when you have experienced human trafficking and you have been sold, and your worth becomes, the sexualization, then that's what you feel like your worth is. But here's a girl who, with all that, still knew she wanted to go home to Jesus. Yeah. And I have no doubt. I remember just laying in bed that night and I was just crying. And this whole peace came over me because I knew wholeheartedly she was dancing with Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think, man, and even as I was doing this podcast this morning, I was driving into work and I thought, man, I really want to share that God is like, is she like child? Did he like put her back as a child where she just gets to be free?
Yeah.
Is she dancing as an adult? I got her at like 16 or 17. She was like, I asked her, I couldn't even remember. She's like 24. And I think that that's like the beauty. And like, if she was going to go to court today, everybody would see these charges and they're not pretty. They're not pretty. I'll be honest. There's like fighting law enforcement and doing all these things. But like, I knew who she was. And she was a child of God. She was a child of God who had this unbreakable spirit, who loved iguanas and learned how to garden and plant things and cook. And for a small time period, she authentically had individuals who loved her and their action showed her who Jesus was. And I think that that's important to hear because this was a girl who did have a lot of trauma. A lot of times these girls have been sexually molested. And that doesn't happen in some form. That happens with people who and it was happened by a family member. And that is a lot of times the sexual molestation is what kind of leads sometimes into this, or when kids are not being seen and heard and they're so vulnerable or being bullied. They are seeking that validation and that attention. So there's not one child on this planet who cannot be manipulated like that. And we have to understand that as a society, because I've seen girls with the best parents who are doing all the things, but those kids are still struggling internally to fit in and meet some guy and think, oh my God, he's going to make all my hopes and dreams come true. And then I have girls who are trying to survive. They're trying to eat. Their parents do drugs. we have a huge problem in the state with parents trafficking their children for drugs,
gosh.
for rent. And I think that like it's happening everywhere. But we just, and people are busy, right? You're busy, you're raising your kids, things are going. But this is happening all around us. And it's not just a human trafficking issue, it's a pornography issue, it's a child pornography issue, it is a sexual molestation. And we have such the sexualization of children. I mean, even depending on the situation, someone could have child porn on their computer. They're not getting jail time. They get a felony, maybe registered offender.
Yeah.
But like we a lot of times just look the other way. And this is a very small scale compared to when we think about the Epstein and the Fogel, which I was front and center for.
I want to ask you a question because this is something I saw on my side of the coin dealing with organized crime. And I'm sure that you see it too, but I just want to verify that I'm not off in the weeds. I don't want to say something that's not right. One of the problems that we run into is that the court system is so overworked and so overloaded that we may start off with some kind of felony level charge that would actually warrant some kind of time. But because the jail system is also so slammed and overloaded, a lot of times we don't want to take everything through the actual court process, so we plea bargain. And we wind up getting charges either wiped off or reduced to a point where it doesn't really carry any weight anymore. Is that something that you are witnessing as a failure point for you on your side of the coin that I watched?
I mean, I think, yes. I mean, I think when the big juncture of how many years I worked cases with law enforcement, I think I maybe had 5 or 6 convictions. So you can play that in your head, right?
Wow.
So it's a game. Like you have, let's talk about the hierarchy, right? And this is important for people to understand. So you have a hierarchy, right? There's a hierarchy in trafficking. You have what is called the trafficker, right? And we'll just go with, you have 2 kinds of traffickers, right? You have what's called the Romeo pimp. This is the person who is like, you're beautiful, I love you, I want to marry you, I got all these like ladies, right? You have the pimp. Then you have the other kind of pimp that's like, if you don't do what I'll say, I'll put a bullet in you, I'll put a bullet in your family, and I will kill you. Both pimps are violent. One just owns their violence, right?
Yeah.
Then you have what is called, you can tell it's been a minute to think of the terminology that I've taught for years. Then you have what is called like the bottom, right? Or the wifey. And this is the person who basically will say, even if you think about like a strip club, it's the house manager, right? This is the person who's connected to the trafficker, who's connected to the pimp, who's kind of running the girls, setting up the dates, running the show. So the trafficker has realized, oh, well, I'm going to put everything in this person's name. So I can kind of detach from the responsibility and accountability from this. So then you have the girl who's normally from childhood has been trafficked, who now is a trafficker, running the girls from the above, the hierarchy. And then you have her running the girls. She's the one collecting the money, setting the dates, putting the hotel rooms in her name, renting the car, like all the things where there's such a detachment. And these cases are really hard to prosecute. You have to have a lot of evidence. They take a really long time. One of the cases that I had, that it was my last case before I left. And me and the detective worked very, very hard on this. And I'm there to testify. And this young girl, we did a recovery. It was a really quick, let's go on the west side of Indy to go get her. And it was just like, I mean, I'm talking tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of evidence. So like this girl, I want to say at the time, she might have been 14 or 15. She had a list. So she was recruiting. Actually, that's what it's called. Like under it's the bottom and then it's recruiter. So she's recruiting. So he was having her, a 15 and 16-year-old, start recruiting her friends. So that's another thing. That's how it happens. So you have a child, let's say they're in the foster care system, they're in a residential facility. So the trafficker says, okay, when you go in there, I want you to recruit all your friends and then I'll start running them. So it's this high profit with low accountability. And these traffickers are savvy. It's a business. They're running they're running a business.
How much of a business is it a year?
I don't know what the updated stats are, but I think I said $32 billion industry.
Oh my goodness.
So
is that international or is that just here?
That's just the United States.
Oh my goodness. So you can only imagine you take that and extrapolate that math out internationally and we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars.
And what happens with these girls is it becomes like it's psychological manipulation, right? And then what we call, and what I train on, it's this trauma bond, right? It's like, okay, it's that instant, it's almost like, okay, for the three of us, right? Maybe when we were in our 20s or McDonald's was okay. But for somebody who's never had like fast food and like say their trafficker goes and buys them McDonald's, that's a big deal. So they will beat them, hurt them, rape them, do all these horrible things. And then in the same turn around and go, oh, baby, I love you. I'm so sorry. My temper got the best of me. Let me go get you some McDonald's. Let me go buy you a new outfit. Like these girls aren't getting any of this money. They might get their nails done. It's a product. He wants to keep them to where it's their product. And then some people don't care about what their product is, right? They will give them drugs and string them out. People will come in and we'll do 2-for-1 specials. I mean, I could go down a whole train on this. But like, there's a very dark society. And these are happening. And these are happening right now. These are happening right now on Shadeland. These are happening on Michigan Road. It's happening in Castleton. It's happening over off of Rockville Road. No. In one of these hotels, somebody's being trafficked right now. It might be an adult or it may be a child.
What is the breakdown?
Or it might be both.
Two? But between percentage,
there's not really statistically. I think a lot of individuals who are engaged in prostitution, not all, because I don't want to upset anybody, but a lot of them are little girls who are trafficked themselves. And honestly, most women who are engaged in prostitution, they're trying to survive.
Yeah, sure.
That's what they know.
Yeah. Right.
You know, I always say this where people are like, well, I just don't know why somebody won't leave the strip club, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, if a woman is trying to support her children and she's making $3,000 to $5,000 a week or a night, but Wendy's wants to offer her $14 an hour, you can't even afford housing on that. So like people just, they have this idea, but it's their idea. They're not living it. You know, I would love to see all those individuals. Even if we talk about incarceration, a lot of those women have a lot of childhood trauma.
Sure.
It all comes down to your childhood trauma that leads into all these different things.
It's amazing.
And this generational trauma. Yeah.
We have a little kitten. She's about a year now, so she's not full grown yet. She'll be in about another year before she's full grown. But we literally got her from a parking lot when she was about, I don't know, 2-3 weeks old. I mean, she was little. We were still having to basically nurse her and feed her milk and stuff. And it's amazing to me to watch this little animal who came into this environment and obviously has had nothing here that of any scare at all and has been only loved here and hadn't had anything traumatic happen. How much I can still see the imprinting of those first couple weeks out in the world on her and how she acts. She's very cautious and very skulky. She watches her back all the time. And I know that seems strange, but I think of that and how much more fragile are we as human beings. So when these types of things happen to a child, the imprinting is just so heavy on a child. It messed up kids grow up to be messed up adults. We talked about it earlier today. And hurting people.
Their brains that's right. Yeah. Hurt people, and their brains, they're stuck. Like somebody who's experienced so much childhood trauma, they're really not coming into adulthood till after maybe 30s or 40s, depending I mean, they're stuck,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
I always say, like, the body keeps the score. We carry everything in our body, and we have a mental health issue
Yeah, big time.
of access and having real conversations about mental health and in addiction and why people are choosing drugs. I mean, if I was being sold for sex or beaten, I would choose drugs too. I mean, I think, who wouldn't? Because you want to mask, you want to disassociate from your
Yeah.
reality. And I think there's so many people who, we have a bunch of individuals who do disassociate, or they're like, everybody's like, they have borderline personality disorder. Well, they have a lot of borderline traits because of all the trauma that they've experienced, or they have PTSD or complex PTSD from childhood. But we don't want to address why we have babies having it. And I think the thing that goes back, it's a generational cycle, right?
Yeah.
I think being little, I would see people give babies bottles with Kool-Aid in it. Now, I know not to give a baby Kool-Aid, but if that's someone's environment and they're at Walmart and somebody sees them giving them Kool-Aid, we can judge them all we want, but at the end of the day, that may be all they know.
Yeah.
But as educated adults, one of my favorite quotes is from Maya Angelou: when we know better, we do better. The problem is we choose not to do better.
No.
We
100%.
choose not to, hey, how can we help you parent? Or we don't intervene when we should. Like, anytime a baby is being brought in this environment with heroin and cocaine, shouldn't probably be with the mom. And people can,
Yeah, right.
that's pro-life. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want to do the things right here, but you sure can sit on your soapbox up at church and be like, abortion is wrong. Well, two things have to exist here. Yeah, and that's where probably I get on my biggest soapbox, because I have met so many children, trafficked or not, whether in the foster care system or Department of Child Services. And you know what they want? They want the same thing adults want. All these kids want is to be loved. They want safety, and they want to be loved. I mean, we have parents right now locking kids up in cages. There's like 3 cases in Indiana. 2 professors are doing it. I mean, I don't care about people being arrested for weed. Who gives a shit? Let's start arresting people who aren't doing, who are like putting their kids in cages and who all this like sexual stuff. But I think for me, I mean, as you guys can tell, I'm so passionate about it, but it just becomes this, it becomes exhaustion. Prosecutors are exhausted. Law enforcement's exhausted. Judges are exhausted.
Christian and Marine upbringing mashed together. This is fantastic.
I always say that. I say it's the same story of people who be like, well, you cuss too much. Well, I mean, I can cuss all I want, but my heart for Jesus is fire.
Exactly.
You can agree to disagree with me, but I know where I'm going. And I think
that could be one of mine too.
That's the thing where I feel like Jesus, I love Lauren Daigle, and 2 songs that always resonated was Rescue. If you listen to that song, you get to a point where you feel like you have to recover, you have to do, I became a machine. Like, I have to do, I have to do something for these kids. But then what I had to remember is, like, God has them. God has me. God has them. Even in my darkest moments, from this journey of where I'm at now, and even hearing and dealing with trauma every day, like, God has me. Like, just like them, I need to be rescued. Yeah, and one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, because you're gonna have trauma going through this. Like, there's no way a human being could do what you've done and not have trauma.
No, 3 years ago I started having symptoms of PTSD. Yeah. And I'm open about that. And I think God is so good, because even though it sucks, Amen. God, even in my own personal practice, I see a lot of first responders, and I see people who are struggling with PTSD. And I remember when I first got into private practice, it's like, oh my God, I don't want parents to know I work human trafficking cases. That might wear them out. And then I'm like, that's not who I am. And I think now I grew up in it. If you tattoo yourself, you're going to hell. What is it? You're scripting your, I don't, what is it? What's the thing? Your, I don't know, something in your body. And first of all, I'm like
your
scared of
body's
needles.
temple.
Thank you. Yeah. And the tattoo I got, I don't know if you guys can see it. It says Rebel Heart. And I love it. It means so much to me because that is the heart that God has given me. He has given me that heart to piss people off and stand in the fire. And I will stand with a child. I don't care. I don't care. I will stand with a woman on the corner who just had sex with a football team because God loves her just as much as he loves me. And I think we forget that. I think the church forgets that, which that's a whole other thing for me. We got to do better. And I remember years ago, this is before, I mean, this is where I feel like God was like, what am I going to do with this girl? And I always remember, like, when I first started, I was like, I wonder if God will call me to work in like the red light district. No, he won't. Because if I worked overseas, I would be in a prison for the rest of my life because I would go in there and probably just shoot up the place of all these kids and women that are on the thing. And I'd just be in prison. And that's really where he called me to the United States domestically for sure. And I have people who do that and I know them and I think they're wonderful humans, but I'm very fiery for that. And I just look, and even now, even after my time, and I just think it's the continued sexualization. And I think that's what it comes down to. When I think of like Michael Jackson, when I think of if you grew up in our time, you loved them. I remember I had the Barbie doll. And I think about Britney Spears and I think about Amanda Bynes. And people are like, well, I just don't understand why they have like mental health. And it's because we have exploited them over and over again. And even now, like with Nickelodeon, with The Quiet on the Set, it's so sad to me that none of that surprises me. Here was a father that was saying, no, do not let this person around. Do not. Like, God gave us spidey senses. You need to believe them because they are real.
Yeah.
And this dad did everything. And this mom, and I'm not trying to like throw the mom under the bus, but this mom didn't want to drive on the highway. And now this person had this fall, right? And I hope that God restores him in so many different ways. But then there's still no accountability. Like, why? Why would you not have a mental health professional? Why would you not have someone advocating for children? Because it's money, power, control, continuous sexualization.
Follow the
even
money.
The guy who was
back to that.
Even the guy who was the director, like even listening. I mean, I didn't grow up in that, so like listening to even the sexual innuendos made me want to vomit. Like, here's all, even if he did that, here's all these adults thinking like if somebody sprays something in her face and then it's supposed to be a reflection of sperm, but not one person intervened because, oh my God, we may lose our job. What would happen?
Yeah.
And that's the problem. We are nothing but a bunch of bystanders and not saying, no, this is not acceptable. And it's not.
Yeah.
I don't even know. So watching that, it broke my heart. And it broke my heart to think about all the people who were celebrities who basically stood up for this guy because he had never molested them. And nobody believed this child. I mean, it was the same thing. Yeah. And part of it is it's a parenting issue. We have a huge parenting issue.
Oh, yeah.
Parenting issue.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to choose? Money or fame, or are you going to choose your child? What are you going to choose? Being best friends with your kids or saying, no, you're not going to have social media. No, you're not going to do this because I care about you physically, spiritually, and mentally.
Yeah.
And all those things are a combination.
You start to say something.
What Jim Brewer said.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Where people would bring their kids like on the set or something and they didn't care what was happening to their kids. They got to meet all these celebrities.
Yeah.
That's what Jim Brewer said. And that's terrible.
I mean, he said it was like the parents would just come in and be like, here, take my child. I just want to be part of this.
Yeah.
And then they didn't even care what happened.
Yeah.
But it goes back to what you were saying earlier. The thing that you said today that's just like, I think the most frying pan to my face that I just can't fathom is that you have parents that are willing to traffic their own children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like openly, like they know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
for drugs or money or combo pack, probably mainly drugs,
But
I'm sure.
but the saddest part is, Kyle, their parents did it to them.
Yep, yeah, it's cycle
It's
of
like
abuse.
learned behavior. But I also think, like, I never really understood, and you guys might know the verse better than I do, but I never really understood idolism, right? How we idolize
Yeah.
until like now. How
Yeah.
and it's just, if you look through, especially with a lot of the sexual stuff, it's that we idolize this person. We who could they, like, whenever he's like, can you believe what's going on with P Diddy? Yeah, I can.
Yeah, sure can.
Yeah, sure can. I'm sure there's some drug trafficking. I'm sure there's some arms trafficking. I'm sure there's I can.
Well, it's not like we
and then
haven't
everybody
seen it
sees the
already.
video and they're like, oh, I can't believe, like, he beat his, really? We can't see that?
Right, yeah. Like, we already know. Like, do you think R. Kelly was an isolated incident?
Oh, we don't want it. We don't want Miss Tracy to go down that road, especially
it's
close ties to
literally
Chicago and trafficking.
It's the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's like this is like almost like a carbon copy of what we had with R. Kelly.
Yeah.
But probably worse, honestly, because he's even probably more connected, and Lord knows he has tons of money. I mean, he's a billionaire, I think, right? I'm like,
yeah.
Well, then one of the girls who was like in the band who tried to, again, right? There's that one person that's like, I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to advocate for myself. But then everyone's like, you sit down. We don't believe you. We're not going to hear you.
Yeah.
Right.
And now they're like, but that's not redemption for them. They should be believed.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's an element too of like, it's almost like they probably know. They probably have something in there that's telling them their spidey senses are going off. But there's probably almost an element to it too of like, shut up, you're ruining a good thing for the rest of us.
Yeah.
And it's disgusting. It's like, dude, like, what happened to righteousness and justice?
Yeah.
And it's disturbing.
But it's so... You guys might get mad at me for doing this, but I'm going to do it.
Probably not.
I like to use, we'll just say the Epstein, we're just going to say Trump, right? So if people like Trump, if people like Trump, good for you. I can agree to disagree.
If people like Trump, they need to pay better attention.
I have agreed to disagree. I get it. Economically, we'll say first term. I don't this term. But anyway, first term, right? Because I have a lot of law people who like him, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I am not standing on the front lines of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And somebody going to tell me I'm going to grab them by the, like, there's,
right.
And people will like fight me on there. They're like, well, you care too much about a moral, ethical compass. That's the problem, y'all. We all should care more about an ethical, moral
what kind of argument even is that?
But it's the same, right? Like, nobody,
right.
I mean, at the end of the day, and this is a broad statement, but nobody gives a shit, Kyle Finn, right? Like, the president's having sex with a porn star, like,
that's right.
Nobody cares. Like, even if he was involved with Epstein, you don't think all those Christians were going to be lined up? But like, I'm going to, like,
no,
don't go there. So I'm just like, that's a no for me. And I say this because let me just further my point of like, if we don't think we can do better, we got bigger problems.
That's right.
Like, you know what I mean? For all of it. But I'm like, when I think it's the Christians who infuriate me the most. And I think, one of the things that cost me.
Come on over to our side.
One of the things that really cost me the most of running Restored and working with this work is my faith in the church and me seeing it ran like a big business and not seeing people who I loved and respected not give two shits about human trafficking. And that
you're absolutely right.
That has broke me. That has made me, I have not had a home church, which I miss that community. And I'm not going to name the church that I went to for years. And there's some really good ones out there. There's a lot of great churches that really poured into Restored. And they will always have such a place in my heart, even churches that maybe I don't believe in the prosperity of gospel, but like they still stood in the churches with me to do something. And I think one of the things that I have struggled with the most is my jadedness from the church and the blinders that was taking off of me. And part of working human trafficking and doing ministry, I mean, anyone who does ministry knows it can be a very, very lonely place. You sometimes feel like you could be in a lifeboat out there by yourself, especially when you're leading it. But it's just this idea that it's really just a big business and we're going to care about what we're going to care about. And and we're not really going to preach the truth when really you probably have a really 10%, depending on how big your church is addicted to pornography in your congregation. But we're going to pretend that that doesn't exist because we come to church on Sunday and bring a casserole. I just, so that's probably the thing that has hurt me the most and where I struggle with the most. Not all the trauma, not all the things I've seen, but the people who I believed were my community and who that you look and think, man, they have a heart for Jesus, but really some of them just don't. They settle that self-righteous of, I'm going to judge you, but I'm not going to judge the fact that I'm having an affair. And it goes back. And I'm just really going to probably just keep, I don't pissing off maybe your population or anyone, but I say this too, like we want to talk about, and I don't, listen, I think a woman's body is a woman's body's choice. But when we talk about abortion, what I find interesting about, especially from like the political world, is a lot of, we'll not say a lot, we'll say a percentage of those men have had mistresses that they've paid to have an abortion. But they're going to stand on their almighty of this. And I think that that's the thing. Like, instead of the judgment, it's, we need to hold people accountable, but where is that community aspect of that? Because the people, usually there's someone who's the loudest about this or that, or taking birth control or whatever away, is the person doing the stuff. Like maybe the Duggar family. We'll just throw the Duggar. Because again, when you think about it, it becomes a big business. Big business, image. So I think when you get to a place where you don't really give a shit about your image or someone's perception of you, that's where really good work can be done. But we live in a society of like, you should do this, or you should look like this, or let's pretend to do this, or all my kids, I want to be if I want to be Insta famous. And there's just such a disconnect from reality. And you have we live in a world now where even politically, it's like, I don't know how anyone can really agree with anything. I think we all just need to maybe start walking and start doing our neighborly duties and stop talking about this person's doing this or this person's doing this. And maybe it's time for all of us to get our hands dirty.
Yeah. But in the town we live in, it's not friendly. I'm out there, I wave at people. I say, hey, they don't wave back. No. It's like we've lived there 20 years and we're outsiders. We're not a part of the town.
And you live in a small area, area too, Ben.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like this whole...
Get off my lawn.
Well, I am like that with some of the little kids. I was. but we sit on our porch and there's no community. Nobody comes and talks to each other. Yeah. And I think that's what we've really lost is checking on people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because nobody knows. I mean, we know the ones that live right next door to us, but the ones down the street, no. Because, people come in and out all the time. And like you said, we've lost the community.
Yeah.
I had a... go ahead.
Go ahead, Tracy. No, you go ahead, please.
What I was going to say is one time I had a mom say to me, like, people will bring a casserole and show up if somebody dies, but nobody's showing up when my kid just got diagnosed with schizophrenia. Nobody's showing up when I'm at this horrible mental place because my child has been trafficked or my child has been molested. Mm-hmm. And then there's the other where there's the shame of, if I tell somebody something's happened, are they going to judge me as a parent? Are they going to shame me and make me feel like I've done something wrong? Instead of saying, hey, I don't know what you're going through, but let me help you. And one of the things I've always taught the boys, and I say, we never, ever, ever, ever know what is going on in somebody's head.
Yep.
We don't know if they're struggling with depression. We don't know if they're struggling with anxiety. We don't know if maybe they have a mood disorder. You know, I said this the other day. If all women would be honest about when they start going through perimenopause and they start having suicide ideation, we'd be in a different place because your hormones are out of place. You don't feel like yourself. You feel like you're, losing your mind. Now I know, like when I was younger, when people were like, old women are crazy. I get it because you feel crazy at times when your hormones are changing. But we don't have those conversations. We just isolate and pretend that, oh, that's their problem. Oh, someone's hitting. I'm going to look the other way. I'm not getting involved. And God calls us to get involved. If I saw my fellow man being beaten, I'm going to engage. And I'm 5'1" because it's the right thing to do. And we don't do that. I mean, we aren't doing that with school shootings. We're not doing that with our neighbors, And I mean, I could be a friend. I was told just not too long ago that I didn't seem like the friendliest neighbor, which is fair because after I listen to people all day, I usually just go home, I walk Kona, and I kind of stick to myself. But I also thought about that. I'm like, I don't want people's perception to be that they can't approach me. But I think oftentimes, just like everybody else, we're tired, right? We've worked all day, we're tired. But we have to get back to, loving somebody and loving our neighbor, even if we don't like them, right?
Yeah.
I don't like a lot of people, but I respect them because God does and God loves them.
Well, we're not walking their journey either. I think that's for me. It is difficult. Yeah. And I'm still called to love them, and that's very difficult. One of the things that I've really tried to start doing is we have so many Christians that just check the box and are walking the walk, right? The casserole. I like it. I'm going to start calling them casserole Christians. We're going to make that. That's a new t-shirt we're going to have. Casserole. Don't be a casserole Christian. But, one of the things I started doing is, man, actually pray with people. Yeah. Like genuinely pray with people.
Yeah.
Like don't just say, well, we'll pray for you.
Yeah.
I hate that. It's so hollow. I've actually started to write out prayers. Like you see stuff on Facebook and people are going through stuff and they reach out or whatever. And then you get this. It's kind of nice because you do get the comment section that can be like this really powerful thing of encouragement, man. There's good things in that too, but we just use everything for wickedness. But I literally will try to type out a prayer in there and actually say the prayer if I don't know the person's number or whatever, can't talk to them directly. But and that may come across as some people like self-serving and whatever. I'm not going to worry about what they think, but I think that's important to actually pray with people, man. Yeah. And,
it's one of my favorite things to do when I have the opportunity. Yeah. I think sometimes it's even creating the opportunity, right?
Yeah. Yeah, man, because people need prayer. And if somebody has the courage enough to step up and stand forward and say, hey, I got this going on in my life. That's one of the things I love about our church. Is people will stand up and they'll say, hey, I have this prayer need. Yeah. Or a family member has this prayer need. I mean, good grief. We've got a family here in Little Thorntown that there was a stabbing that happened between two kids. And now they're going to try the kid as an adult. And he's got all these things that he's troubled. He's a troubled kid. Don't know all the trauma that's gone into that. But this is a kid. He's a kid when they're going to try to treat him like an adult. And it's so sad because we live in such a broken world that needs so much prayer and healing that it's almost sometimes you don't know where to start. But so unless Ben has another one, kind of last question for me for the day is what can we do? What are some things? I know we've kind of touched upon things, but I want to kind of summarize here at the end. What can we do to help fight these things, the trafficking? And if it's from I'm sure a financial aspect of things too is always going to be helpful. What are some good organizations to contribute to help with that? But what are some things that we can do, just everybody, to help fight this?
I think I'm glad that you asked this question because I think a lot of people, they'll hear me talk or in the past where they've heard me talk, like you get fired up, right? You want to get out there, you want to go fight those traffickers and you want to go bust these people. But at the end of the day, the number one thing that you can do that's going to make a lasting impact is parent your children. Have conversations with them. Advocate. You teach them how to advocate. You tell them. When I will say, and this will be, but I feel like the boys know at this point. When the boys were little, and my sister have them, and I have 2 nephews, and I love them. They're like my whole heart. And I would always have conversations about their bodies. You don't ever want your child to feel shame about their body.
Right.
Everybody has a body. Everybody has body parts. Stop sexualizing it. It's not here to be sexualized. Have conversations about their body. You have conversations about, hey, if somebody asks you, like, can I see this? Or somebody touches you, or somebody makes you feel uncomfortable. You have an open dialogue with your children.
Yeah.
That you can come and have a conversation. The average age a boy is exposed to porn is 11 years old. That is fact.
Wow.
And you have a conversation. One of the things I think that was the hardest thing for me when the boys were born, they're 4 years apart. And I'm like in the trenches of this, right? I would never do a forensic interview on anybody that was their age because it just hit too close to home. Everything else I was able to do. I mean, now they're 16 and 12. And I remember anytime they would have a sleepover, anytime I'm a forensic interviewer. So I would ask them, like, where did you sleep? Who took you to the bathroom? Like, it doesn't have to be an interrogation, but it has to have conversations. Stop giving your children phones at 8 years old. Stop giving your children computers. Hey, FYI parents, YouTube has porn. Kids has porn.
Yeah.
It's anime. You might think your child's watching a cartoon. Guess what? There's porn in it. Parent. Phones and computers are not there to parent your children. Social media. I could go and go and go. Social media can be the devil, right? And it can be. It's the best thing and the worst thing that's ever happened. On one hand, you can Google and nobody has to use 10 pages of a MapQuest to go anywhere, right? And we have access to all these things. But on the other, it's raising our children. This is what you should look like. This is what you should be. You're getting bullied. Subscribe to this. This is the only way that you're going to fit in. Or, hey, if you think that your child isn't going to get a dick pic or a boob pic, you're wrong if they're on it. You have men, privacy or not, who will DM and you click on it. And guess what? Your child is now exposed to something maybe that they shouldn't be exposed to. We, as adults, are there to provide safety nets for our kids, right? Like, you can have the best kid in the world, but that kid is still a teenager. That kid is still in elementary school. That kid still their brain is not developed. Sometimes I think the age of 25, we need to push it back more because a lot of adults, it seems like their brains aren't developed, right? And even if they make the best choices or they're the best kid, it is still our duty to protect and parent them. You know,
Amen.
Phones don't need to be in bedrooms. Social media, use judgment when they get into high school. Middle school kids don't need Instagram. Middle school kids don't have Facebook. If your kids want to do TikTok, then do it with them. Make it something that you do together. A lot of these little girls want to do the get ready with me. Then participate in it. So you know what's coming in. Snapchat. I really would like Snapchat to be burned to the ground, but I don't see that happening.
Yeah,
my nephew, like a lot of kids have it. Snapchat's doing 2 things. I'm going to talk about the mental health perspective because I'm in private practice. We have a whole generation that does not know how to communicate.
Amen.
They do not know how to communicate. They're going to have issues getting jobs, or AI is going to be running everything and they're going to just turn into little robots.
Yep.
That is the first thing. The second thing is it makes your children accessible. Yep. And if there's somebody watching this right now and say, that would just never happen to my child, you're wrong. If you don't think your neighbor can manipulate and be a predator to your child, you are wrong. Yeah. If you don't think the person down the street or the 24-year-old guy, your daughter's 16, you're wrong, because I've seen it. I have seen more things in my life that I would never care to see. And you're wrong. And I think it starts with those things. If you don't have children, and or you have children, you have time, become a child advocate. There are so many children in Indiana who need a child advocate. A child advocate is somebody who, whatever county you're in, you go, you you take all these courses, and you mentor, you advocate for this child, because a lot of these children they're going through divorced parents, they're in foster care. We want to get these children before they become victims of human trafficking or sexual exploitation. But these children need a voice. Be a voice for children.
Yeah.
And then support nonprofits. Like Allies is an amazing organization. My friend Jessica Thorne runs it. They do advocacy, but they do a lot of education for parents, and they walk alongside the girls. For adults, Grit for Grace does an amazing job. Stephanie Jeffers is a fantastic human being who was in the sex injury herself and probably loves Jesus more than she's the one that loves Jesus more than her heart's on fire for Jesus more than mine is. When she will just get in the trenches, even when I've been like, girl, that is not safe, right? But she didn't care. And then another is Unconditional. This organization goes to strip clubs, and they're not being like, oh, you need to love Jesus. They're bringing gifts, and their actions are showing loves.
Yeah, they're going to love them out of it instead of judge them out of it.
We do. And like I said, you can judge somebody, but if they're making $5,000 and then they go to Wendy's and they have no education, let's be realistic here. I have a good job, and it's hard to live in general, right? I mean, it just is. I mean, we're in a recession or not, things are expensive. And I think be on the lookout. If you see something and you're at a gas station or you're at a rest stop or you're at a hotel and something just doesn't look right, then make a phone call. The worst that can happen is somebody doesn't show up, or the best thing that can happen is somebody looks. And that doesn't mean intervene yourself, because I've had to tell a lot of older individuals, please don't intervene. You don't know if somebody has a gun. You don't know what's going on. And a lot of times these girls, they're not trying to be rescued, right? They're in it. They think this guy loves them. Again, the many times I've been into the juvenile system, and I've had quite a few girls whom I love to pieces, where they've told me to go F yourself. I don't give a shit what you have to say to me.
Yeah.
Don't try to sell Jesus to me. I'm like, I'm not trying to sell Jesus to you. I'm here because Jesus loves me, and I know he loves you. And I'm here because this is what he's called me to do, and I love and care about you. You think about it, I got 30 seconds. I got 30 seconds to try to build something with a girl who's in the juvenile facility doing an interview. And they would say to me over and over again, and it's not that I'm special, but when you have been told by DCS, hey, I'm going to do this, and people don't show up for you, and I'm like, I'm there because I love them. I'm authentic. They can tell me to go F myself. They can tell me the worst things about them, and I'm not going to start crying. And I think people are like, how did you do that? Because of God.
Yep.
I didn't drink because of God. I didn't go run away because of God. I didn't use drugs because of God. Because when you see that stuff, let me tell you, you want to go have a cocktail.
Yeah.
You don't want to get out of you don't want to get out of bed. You don't and it's not that I did not have my own moments of depression or just feeling like overwhelmed, but I didn't do those things. You can't do that work without God, in my opinion. And because it's dark. But I will say this, even I've seen what I say, I've been in the trenches and seen the darkest things in the world. And I say this wholeheartedly, and I believe it. I still believe, after everything I've seen, that there is more good in this world than bad.
Amen.
And I do. And I believe it wholeheartedly, even with all the individuals running around out there. I believe that there is more good and there is more bad. And I think another thing you can do is, everybody has an opinion, but you have no idea how hard law enforcement is working. You have no idea how hard these prosecutors are working in these residential and these juvenile facilities. It's daunting. And guess what, guys? They don't get paid shit. Prosecutors don't get paid anything. Unless you're if you're at a federal level. And I used to say this, like, we are all exposed to trauma, and you don't get in this work. I mean, I have my own childhood trauma. Like, you don't get in this work without something. And I think that's why I'm such a fierce advocate at times, because I think every child should be loved and have safety,
Yeah.
But I wasn't immune to like getting PTSD. But I think the difference is God uses that to where when I have a first responder saying, man, I've seen really horrible. And I'm like, I can relate. It's not the same, but none of us are immune to mental health. Not if you do this work for a long time.
No,
and we live in a society like where most of our children, definitely from COVID, we have anxiety. There's so much uncertainty in this world. So tell a cop thank you for doing what they're doing. And I know there are bad people, there are bad apples in everything that we do, every profession. Even in the church, y'all. Even in the church.
Oh, I'm going to go especially in the church.
I think that we miss the idea that we are all broken. We all have our own brokenness. None of us. There's not one person. True. I remember, I have to share this story real quick, you guys, I remember it was a certain church. I'll never forget this. I swear I just still to this day. I was pretty new. I was still like 4 years in. I go to this church. I go talk to this youth pastor. I have a girl. She's in a predominant area, and I really wanted some of the girls from church, the youth group, to engage with her. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to him. And I remember him saying his exact words to me. Well, I mean, I don't know, because these girls are perfect. First of all, y'all, I don't know what teenagers are perfect. And I remember that was probably the first time. This is probably the first time. This is probably the first time with God's like, here we go. And I remember, and I was very kind. And I remember saying to him, we are all broken. Are you not broken? Because I know I'm broken. I know we are all broken. None of us are short of sin. None of us.
Yeah.
And I'll just never forget that. Like, from a parenting perspective, I'm sure some parents, I mean, I don't even know for my own, right? There's a certain level of, do you want an influence? But like at the same time, you do it. I mean, one of the best things I have ever given to the boys is that even though they were young, they didn't know what I did. We had girls at Christmas, had girls at Thanksgiving. And I was there, but I have so many memories of 2 of them playing Mario Kart with Andrew.
There you go. Or
making their own banana pudding. And the first girl I brought home, she hadn't been out of residential in like 10 years. The judge hated her. He hated me too. Mm-hmm. And it took this many years. And I remember picking her up and I think, God, please don't run on me. Please don't run on me. Like the judge was gonna but I remember my family got her Christmas gifts and they embraced her because she was just a child. And I was nervous. I was nervous about her being around my babies. But she's just a kid and she was so respectful. Yeah. And that's one of the things I loved about my girls, because I talked about the boys a lot and they knew, wow, they knew. They were like, we have made it. Tracy loves us. Like, and they were so respectful of my family, because part of the problem is too, in the society that we live in, and even as a therapist, I'm a relationship-based human. That's the mark too. Even in therapy, if I don't allow myself to be authentic, then why? I don't understand. Like, why would I don't want to see someone not authentic. But those girls knew I would call them on their shit. We're not doing that. And you're right, Kyle, I'd run things like boot camp. We need stability. We need guidelines. We need structure. We need boundaries. But I also truly, genuinely love them. But we all do. We need structure, we need boundaries. And no matter even if it's right or wrong, I always try to speak the truth in love. And I think that's why the girls liked me. And someone say, well, I hate you. That's cool. But the majority loved me and I loved them. And they gave to me and taught me more than I ever gave to them.
Yeah, they saw you.
And what a privilege that is. Yep. I mean, what a privilege that is. And I say that and I thank God for that. I thank God that even though like my season was over, I thank God that what a privilege I had to serve those girls and let them know how much Jesus loves them and how much Jesus loves
Amen.
me.
Do you still talk to some of them?
I do. Some reach out. There was a time where I just really needed a break. A couple of years
Yeah.
ago, I was really going through some stuff for myself. I was starting perimenopause. I started to have PTSD symptoms. My dad was sick. I came home and just had my own stuff. And, but yes, they reach out and I talk to them when I can. Um, and some of them tell me how great they're doing. Some of them have kids. Some of them are doing well. Some of them are still in the life. Um, so yes, but there has been this really break for me the last 3 years, you know, and a
Yeah.
lot of it came from when I moved to San Diego for the year to kind of take a break and kind of reflect on everything that has kind of happened and just kind of the other plans if I started going through perimenopause and my hormones and all those things. So probably this last year is when I really have kind of felt like my normal. And I think too, like one of the things I was never prepared for is I didn't love being in the public eye. I didn't love sometimes I didn't care to do like news. I think the difference between my organization as others is I will never exploit a child for
Yeah.
money or for. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things I wasn't willing to talk about. I wouldn't use my kids as leverage to get money. Um, and that's just like I hold true to that. So I think for the first 3 years of Restored, it was just me. So I think I sacrificed a lot in that time period, and I'm still kind of trying to like figure that out. I mean, even talking to you guys, like I know that I still have that fire and that passion and what God's called me to do, but I've definitely been in a place of where I just do private practice and have kind of taken a back seat to all that because it just got to the point where I'm human. It became too much for me. It became too much of
Yeah.
me trying to do all the things, setting at like the who's of who's table, where there's such a reach from reality to serving kids and working in the environment and the hustle that I did for so long. And I say that like a few of my guys have just retired. One of my guys just retired. That we become really, and I would say one of the best things that came out of that relationship is our friendship. And he just retired from the FBI, and I think about him. Not only did he trafficking, but this is a man who was doing child porn. Like, and I had a boundary. Like, I wouldn't do those cases because I know my heart couldn't handle it. And he spent years doing that with trafficking, and he just retired. And he's a hero. People just, and he is like, people don't understand. And I always say I've seen the light of it, right? Like, I haven't seen
Yeah.
a lot. Like when you talk about Kyle, like the cult stuff, and like he has seen some really
Yeah, I'm sure.
horrific child things. And I think those are some of the best relationships that, I got out of it. And just their love too. Like I worked with the northern guys. I have two guys in particular that I worked with, and they just were always victim centered, and they always treated any of our teenagers like that they were humans and that they were loved. And they said some really, like I said, they're not, people have this impression that, oh, like you're rescue. No, they're not happy to see us. They're not happy to see us. But eventually it's like anything else, you're deprogramming that.
Yeah,
But
right.
I think we just have to, the best thing you can always do again is just like having those conversations with your kids.
No, for sure.
They're the ones that are going to empower. Those are the ones that we can stop, like from making sure
Yeah.
if you're not sexually molested or sexually abused, or you're not exposed to porn, then that's the fruitful change.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
generational cycle we want to create
Yeah.
instead of the other, because you're
Yeah.
going to help protect kids. But wow. Well, Tracy, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for talking to us. But thank you more for your heart, your passion, and all the things that you've done. And there is a cost to this. I think that's important to say too, for everybody that's working in this. The FBI agent you talked about, and there are going to be hundreds and thousands of people out there who are seeing the most horrific things that you can probably can't even imagine and don't want to imagine. There is a cost to this, and it's not just for the kids, but for the adults and the people that are engaged in stopping this. So I just want to say thank you so much for what you've done, what you continue to do, and just for your heart and your love of God and Christ, and wanting to stop this horrifically evil thing that is going on, and do your part to help with that. And we all have a part to play. Yeah. But just thank you so much for your time and talking to us today. I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for getting me out of the bringing me back out.
I was excited after last night we were talking. I was very excited. I texted Kyle and said, "That's going to be great. That's going to be awesome." And I just like to hear people talk. I might not say much, but I'm listening, and I'm like,
Well, it's one of those things. It's always the Deborah Downer, right? It's like everybody. It's like you're like the party buzz, right? Everybody, either someone's like, "Wow, tell me about that. That's so interesting," or someone's always like, "Oh, okay. Well, I don't know how you do that. God bless you." And then they walk away.
For the ones that ask and then go walk away, you know what I smell? Casserole. A casserole.
You know,
Christian.
one of my first things I had, it's the Church of Women United, and there were older ladies, and I went and they gave me this like humanitarian award, and I didn't even expect it. And I just think like these were women who were like 67 and 80, and they're fire for social justice. So there is no excuse at what age we are to show up and do something, whether it's, and again, sometimes it's just about mentoring or saying hi to a kid down the street, or noticing, hey, is this kid struggling, or does this kid not have clothes, or does this kid need something? Because I think too, when kids and even adults, when somebody feels so isolated and that nobody cares, that's when people can go down like a really dark road. And sometimes it's about saying, you know, hey, you know, even like downtown, like if you see somebody, you know, I always say this, when you see someone talking to themselves, and, you know, I've spent so much time at clinics doing like schizophrenia work and all that. It's like, what you don't understand is a lot of those men and women, those are veterans. You're here because of their sacrifice. Yeah. You know, and I think sometimes there's a cost to all the things that we do. And, but I think that you have to, I always tell my kids in here, I think when we know who we are through Christ, in Christ alone, without all the other, then we're unstoppable.
Amen. I agree.
And I believe that, even as jaded as I am about the church and things like that. And people are like, well, you don't act very. And I'm like, well, you know what? My heart for Christ is on fire. And
that's right.
One day God will be like, Tracy, you could have done things differently. But I think at the end of the day, he'll also say, thank you for doing the things and saying yes to what I called you to do.
Nah, you know what I think you're going to hear? I think you're going to hear. You're going to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. Yeah. So,
and then my mom will be like, tell her prescribing your body with that tattoo.
Oh, well, people have their opinions on that, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But no, again, thank you so much for your time, and really appreciate it. And with that, I guess we will bid everyone adieu until the next time on The Foil. Take care.
Bye.